So recently I had to make a tough decision, and it was on top of a pretty rough weekend filled with panic attacks and triggers. And I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about how I applied some DBT skills during that time. Welcome to my Borderpolar podcast. Today I'm talking about dialectical behavior therapy applied, and we'll be talking about pros and cons in decision making. So just a real brief overview of the 4 skill areas or the 4 modules of DBT. There's the Interpersonal Effectiveness module, the Distress Tolerance module, Emotional Regulation module, and Mindfulness Skills module. All 4 of these areas of DBT are important in learning how to recognize what behaviors you're making, why you're making those behaviors, how they impact others and yourself, and how to go about making changes so that you can live a more fulfilling life that's true to your values and true to your intentions. Interpersonal effectiveness has to do with making decisions, being okay with change or resisting change, and meeting your goals while trying to avoid further damage. Distress tolerance helps you with learning to accept, tolerate, and learn from your pain. Emotional regulation has to do with decreasing the vulnerability that you have to your emotion mind and putting you more in a wise mind state. And it also has to do with building mastery of the skills that you learn in both distress tolerance and the mindfulness skills modules. Putting those into play helps with emotional regulation. Mindfulness skills is going to be a module where you learn about radical acceptance. So accepting each moment for as it is and without any judgment. So you taking that non-judgmental stance is another important area of mindfulness. So those are the 4 modules in DBT. So the weekend I had started with some panic attacks that came on from some pretty common triggers for me, one of which is wardrobe. And if you have borderline personality disorder, you might understand what that's like, because having a lack of self-identity creates a disconnect and a confusion in your brain as to who you are, and that translates into what you're supposed to look like. And so I might have a handful of outfits that I feel comfortable being a human being in, and if I have to wear something uniform or something different that I don't feel like myself in, it causes a lot of problems with my identity disturbance symptom of BPD, causing panic attacks and feelings of emptiness and irritability of mood, and it's difficult to navigate through that. So I was dealing with having to get ready for a party, and there may have been a person who might trigger me at the party, so I had to deal with preparing for that, and I was having a panic attack, and I had to deal with the panic attack and still continue getting ready. And that is not an easy thing to do if you're familiar with panic attacks. And then I was forced to make a decision because I could not get myself to prepare for a job that I was supposed to take. And so the decision before me was to go or not to go. And so I decided to use this 4 square pros and cons that I came across when I was preparing another video. So I don't like to think about it as doing a problem behavior or not doing a problem behavior necessarily, because you could just be choosing between 2 different things that may or may not be good for you. In this case, if you want to choose the problem behavior, if you want to call it a problem behavior, then not taking the job would be the problem behavior. But sometimes you have to do things that are best for your mental health at any given point in time. So I thought of this pros and cons list, and I put on the top taking the job, and I put on the bottom not taking the job. But it really came down to I was in too much of a panic to even get ready for the job, where my body sort of decided for me, and my gut told me it was the right choice anyway. But I did break it down onto these pros and cons lists, and I thought about the short term, and I thought about the long term, and what would be the benefits of forcing myself, if I could, to push myself to go, but I couldn't, or forcing myself to get through the day if I could get myself to get there, but I couldn't, and what it would look like, not that I'm a mind reader or a fortune teller, but what it would look like to take the job and how difficult that would be at this juncture in my life given what my symptoms are like. And I did weigh it out with this pros and cons, and it made me feel a lot better about my decision. I like it better than the pros and cons list with one on each side, because oftentimes when you're thinking of pros and cons, you have two choices and you really need to think out the pros and cons of each result. So I did use that, and it was very helpful for making my decision. As far as the Dear Man skills goes, which is part of the objectiveness, effectiveness skills in the interpersonal effectiveness module of DBT, I did use part of this because I had to call the job and I had to let them know I wasn't going to be taking it for medical reasons. And I used a lot of these in that phone call in order to make sure that it was as effective as it could be. I described the situation using facts. I expressed my feelings and emotions. I said I was sorry for having to do this, that I felt bad about it, that I really appreciated the opportunity that they gave me, and that I was clear about what it was that I needed and I didn't need. And so as far as, I'm sorry, I just was making sure my child didn't show up in the video. So I asserted myself in terms of what I was calling for. I reinforced by repeating that I was, again, apologetic for the short notice. And I kept the conversation on what it was supposed to be. I did my best to appear confident in my tone and manner. I didn't have any negotiation to do, so that one really didn't apply. But I definitely used these, and I felt really good about the exchange when I called to tell them that I couldn't be taking the job for medical purposes. The self-respect fast skills, I definitely had to use these when I was coming up with my decision. There's other people that are affected by me taking and not taking a job, and I needed to consider that as well. I needed to be confident in the decision that I made so that when I shared it with others, I would only apologize for the part that that is necessary. Sticking to my values is very important when you're making a decision, and my values are to continue to grow and learn as much as I can in order to become an independent and successful person who can support her children. And so in order to do that, I have to listen to myself and work at the pace that I'm at, not the pace that I wish I could be at. And that leads right into being truthful with oneself. I evaluated myself very carefully to make sure that I wasn't acting helpless and that I wasn't lying to myself about what my abilities were at the moment or exaggerating anything, that I was being truthful to what I could and could not do right then, and that my decision wasn't going to be one that I was going to regret. With the panic attacks I had over the weekend, I definitely used some of the distract skills. I put a square box around the ones that I used. Activities that I enjoy, playing with my children, singing and dancing, helping out others in my community. I did work on my videos and my podcast. Comparing myself to others, I definitely always think to myself that it could be worse. You know, I don't like to think about other people's pain in a way that's supposed to be good, but it is important to be able to pay attention to and notice that you are in a better place than you have been before, and that you could always be in a worse place than you are now. And then causing myself to feel something different by provoking my sense of humor or happiness. So I jump on Facebook sometimes and just get lost in memes for a little while just to kind of distract myself. So I did use several of those distract with accepts to get through the panic attacks. I did a lot of self-soothing as well. I went outside and used sight and enjoyed nature. I took a hot bath a couple of times. I listened to music that calms me down. I drank my coffee, and I do enjoy smelling my coffee as well as drinking it. So I used several self-soothing techniques to get through those panic attacks over the weekend. I also spoke to some friends. To improve the moment, I reflected on what was happening to find the purpose, meaning, or value in the pain that I was going through and the decisions that I was making. And that's always important to do. I used relaxation in the form of music and taking a bath and going for a walk as well. And I continued to repeat my mantra to myself, which is one breath at a time. Don't be too hard on yourself. Enjoy the happy moments when they come, and treat others like you would want to be treated. And that's kind of how I cheerlead myself on with the mantra. So I used several of the improving the moments techniques in order to get through the panic attacks of the weekend as well. Radical acceptance is a tool that I used to be okay with my decision and not make myself feel like I failed at something, because instead I just understood that this is how it is. This is not the job I'm taking, and that is what it is, and that's okay. And I was also careful to make sure that I was proud of myself for taking the steps that I had taken that in the past would have been difficult for me. And so I know that I have grown because I was able to go to the interview. I was able to secure the job. I was able to have my orientation. I wasn't able to go to my first day of real training, but I got farther than I have in a while. And that's something to be proud of. And it is what it is. And it is this present moment is the one I have control over. And I only had so much control over that present moment. My body had taken a lot of control, but I'm working on figuring out how to get it back in those moments. And here's a hard one that I had to really think about that day. Was I being willful or was I being willing? It says willfulness forgets, ignores, or actively tries to change, master, direct, or control or manipulate what is. And willingness is a surrender to a process which one is already a part of, and figuring out what to do to change the next moment. And I really do believe that I was, instead of being willful, I was being willing. I was being willing to let myself feel the anxiety that I was feeling, and understand that it was my body telling me that it was too much for this moment and that I needed to figure out what I was going to do next in order to make things better. I ended up writing 945 words that day of a book that I'd been thinking about for about a year and a half. So I was able to I made a to-do list that I didn't complete yesterday, but I still am going to work on for today and tomorrow. And I just decided to throw myself into something else rather than feel disappointed with myself for having not gone through with something, because it's okay to say, I'm not well enough for this, but I'm going to work on getting well enough for it. And then here are some resources that were from my original post of these graphics and these slides. So if you were looking for them, they are somewhere in here. I wouldn't want to leave that out. Anyway, I just wanted to show how these skills can be applied to get through a crisis moment with an example for you, just in case you're wondering how they can be used. Now, keep in mind, I've never gone through DBT. I've never had formal training. This is just what I'm understanding from what I've been reading and researching myself. If you found this interesting and you're interested in more videos, feel free to like and subscribe. Share it with someone if you think that they would find this application of DBT useful. If not, great. If so, great. Either way, peace and love. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining me on my Borderpolar podcast.